Christopher Nolan is one of the few directors whose name is actually known by regular people. The chosen few, that 1% club alongside Quentin Tarantino, Steven Spielberg, James Cameron, Martin Scorsese, and Peter Jackson. Every director has their fanboys and their haters. But Nolan seems to annoy a higher percentage of the audience than most. He's usually criticized for his pseudo-intellectual vibe, his inability to shoot a coherent action scene, and for being just a tad too pretentious. But it's not like he's doing this on purpose. Okay, maybe a little. He's a massive Stanley Kubrick fan. While most directors might favor one Kubrick film, Nolan claims he loves everything the man ever did. Thankfully, he didn't adopt Kubrick's obsession with doing 100 takes for a single shot. He's not cruel to his actors on principle, though he does have a reputation for being a bit of a tyrant. For instance, actors often mention that chairs are banned on his sets. Rumor has it, Nolan thinks chairs encourage laziness, a trait big shot stars are notoriously prone to. You know how it is. You give a professional an expensive director's chair with their name on it, and suddenly, they're glued to it and you have to kick them to get them to work. Without chairs, the problem disappears. Tom Hardy is fine with it. The guy would nap on a floor grate if you let him. But Leonardo DiCaprio? Not so much. People have definitely noted Nolan's rebellious streak here. To top it all off, he bans phones on set. He's basically the Bill Murray of directors, minus the charm. No TikTok for the cast. They're forced to actually listen to Nolan's lectures. He justifies this obsession by saying he's a man living in the Middle Ages. When he started, mobile phones weren't really a thing. He didn't have one, and now he claims he doesn't need one because he has assistants running around doing the boring stuff. He even famously didn't know he had a work email. When he was shown 1,000 unread messages, he just told them to delete the account and pretend it never happened. For the record, while actors spill the tea about the no-chair policy, Nolan never comments on it, and the studio flat out denies it exists. Acting like Chris is the nicest guy in Hollywood. He's a peculiar guy, but you've got to admire the brand. If you have to hide your love for Michael Bay to avoid being labeled a lowbrow pleb, you can openly obsess over Nolan without losing any street cred, especially now with Odyssey about to drop. And I'd bet my own ass it's gonna absolutely crush the box office. So, it's the perfect time to dive deep into this director's career. But before we start, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. It helps more fans of the genre find this content. Nolan got into cinema thanks to George Lucas, specifically Star Wars. He was so floored by New Hope that he immediately decided, yeah, I'm gonna be a talented director. That's probably why he always dodges questions about directing a Star Wars movie, though there's a chance he might eventually take on Star Wars or James Bond, a franchise he constantly cites as a major influence. Despite his love for film, he studied literature in college. He's a total autodidact, which gives every aspiring filmmaker hope, or a false sense of security. He shot his first feature, Following, on a budget of $6,000. He spent over a year on it because the cast was literally working for food. They had to work day jobs and could only film 1 or 2 days a week. His strategy was pure guerrilla filmmaking. He'd have actors walk down the street acting suspicious, while he stumbled along on the other side pretending to be a confused tourist, filming local landmarks so he wouldn't get punched in the face. He used the smallest rental camera he could find, and almost all the money went into it. He shot in black and white, mostly because he couldn't afford color film and hadn't sold his favorite pants yet. He had to cast his wife and his uncle. They were paid in high fives and gratitude. The script was inspired by burglars who broke into his apartment. He was obsessed with what they were thinking while rifling through his stuff. After he finished, he sent it to festivals, and to everyone's surprise, it actually worked. Critics loved it, and a small indie company released it in the States. On a budget of $6,000, it made $48,000. Not exactly Avatar money, but for Nolan, it was a start. Memento was a much bigger beast. With $9 million in the bank, he brought in his brother, Jonathan, to help write the script. It's loosely based on Jonathan's short story, but since the story was published after the film, it technically doesn't count as an adaptation. Nolan struggled to find crew members. The script was so confusing that one cinematographer, Mark Varga, literally refused the job after reading it, saying he didn't want to talk to a psychopath who would dream this up. He regretted that decision later. Then there was Wally Pfister, a guy who had mostly worked on trash tier projects. Wally admitted he didn't understand the script either, but he had a policy of never asking stupid questions. Nolan loved that kind of intellect and hired him on the spot. They became best friends for life. Brad Pitt was interested in the lead, but his schedule was packed, so Nolan went for a cheaper cast. Guy Pearce ended up being the MVP, spending 20 days on set, while the rest of the cast was in and out in less than a week. Nolan claims he saw something special in Pierce. Though, let's be real, Pierce was more famous thanks to LA Confidential than the other options. The movie was a hit, eventually breaking into the top 10 at the box office despite a limited release. It grossed $39 million globally, and Nolan's career trajectory officially went vertical. Nolan admits he was terrified working on Insomnia. It was his first real studio movie with a massive $46 million budget from Warner Brothers. He could finally hire real actors and actually pay them. But he was annoyed that his script rewrite didn't get him a writing credit due to guild rules, even though he basically redid the whole thing. The project fell into his lap through George Clooney and Steven Soderbergh. They wanted to direct it, but were too busy. So they saw Memento, didn't understand a word of it, and immediately called Nolan. He wanted Harrison Ford, but the producers talked him out of it, warning him that if he annoyed Ford, he'd have to sit in the corner for the rest of the shoot. He settled for Al Pacino and Robin Williams. Both were a handful. Pacino wanted to rehearse everything into the ground. Williams wanted to shoot it instantly. Nolan managed to balance their chaos even if the 100-take rule started to make everyone on set miserable. The film did okay. It grossed $113 million, but it was his first financial disappointment. Nolan still thinks it's underrated. He says it's his most personal film, and even today he gets a kick out of meeting the occasional intellectual who actually wants to talk about Insomnia instead of Inception. After the dumpster fire that was Batman and Robin, Warner Brothers was terrified to touch the Caped Crusader, but the character was a cash cow, so they had to try. They tapped David Fincher, who gave them a pitch, then Clint Eastwood, who rightfully laughed at the idea of directing a guy in a rubber suit. Then Wolfgang Peterson, fresh off The Perfect Storm, tried to get a Batman vs. Superman movie off the ground. That's when Nolan slid into the room, pitched his genius ideas, and the studio was less than impressed and slammed the door in his face. Wolfgang Peterson eventually grabbed Troy. He hated the Batman scripts anyway, and the studio was left with no one. That's when they circled back to the guy who had been loitering in the lobby, Christopher Nolan. This is also where the Josh Hartnett saga begins. Hartnett, who had just bombed with Hollywood Homicide, was being cautious. Nolan wanted to see how he looked with pointy ears. At the same time, Nolan was working on The Prestige and offered Hartnett that role too. Hartnett turned down Batman. There are a dozen stories about this, including rumors that Ben Affleck warned Hartnett that Nolan would turn Batman into another Daredevil disaster. Hartnett did want to be in The Prestige, but after rejecting Batman, Nolan ghosted him. Kurt Russell also passed on the movie. It's funny now, but back then, Nolan was just some guy who had made 2 movies, one of which didn't even break even. Gary Oldman signed on as Commissioner Gordon. With a $150 million budget, Batman Begins pulled in $371 million. Not exactly a smash hit, but the DVD market in 2006 was a goldmine. The movie became the second highest selling DVD of the year in the US. So the studio greenlit the trilogy. Ironically, the success of Batman Begins also gave the studio the confidence to greenlight Green Lantern with Ryan Reynolds. Sometimes success is a curse. The author of the novel, Christopher Priest, initially wanted Sam Mendes to adapt it. Mendes was chasing him around for months. When Nolan's offer came in, Priest had no idea who he was. Insomnia hadn't even hit theaters yet. He rejected Nolan, but then Nolan sent him a copy of Memento. Priest was so blown away that he dumped Mendes and gave the rights to Nolan. Priest claims he just wanted to help an up-and-coming director. Nolan's script changed a lot from the book. By the time they started filming in 2006, Nolan was a thing. So he got his dream cast without a fight. It made $109 million on a $40 million budget. Again, not world-shattering, but it has 1.5 million ratings on IMDb. That's a god-tier number for 99% of movies, so the cult following is real. Nolan filmed The Dark Knight before he had the untouchable status he enjoys now. And before comic book movies were the billion-dollar behemoths, they are post-Avengers. Casting was a mess. Katie Holmes left because she wanted too much money. Matt Damon passed on the project. Another oops moment in his career. In 2007, the Batman Begins earnings didn't look like much, and Damon was busy with the Bourne franchise, which made more money on a smaller budget. He also got a massive $20 million up front for Bourne. Nolan wasn't paying that kind of money. The role went to Aaron Eckhart, who was happy to work for peanuts. As for the box office, there's a common theory that the movie only hit $1 billion because of Heath Ledger's tragic passing. Maybe yes, maybe not. But the reality is, on a $185 million budget, it crossed the $1 billion mark, after a re-release to scrape up the final $4 million. It was only the 4th movie in history to do that. Nolan claims the studio greenlit Inception before Batman Begins even hit theaters. He just wasn't ready. For 5 years, while he was playing with capes, he was secretly nursing this idea. Leonardo DiCaprio didn't even audition. He was a lock. Ken Watanabe was also brought back because Nolan felt he didn't get enough screen time in Batman. Leo reportedly had a huge hand in rewriting the script to make it easier, working with Nolan for months. After Inception, they never worked together again. Some say it's because Leo demands a massive cut of the back-end profits, and Nolan, also a fan of taking a 20% cut, doesn't like sharing the pie. What's also fascinating about Inception is that Nolan and his cinematographer Wally Pfister controlled every single frame. Usually directors have second units, smaller teams led by assistant directors, to film the boring stuff like sunsets, street walking, or random explosions. But Nolan insisted on being there for everything. That's a great way to inflate a budget, but if you're obsessed with practical effects, like building actual rotating hallways instead of just using CGI, you kind of have to be there to make sure the set doesn't crush your actors. The film hit theaters in the summer of 2010. On a $160 million budget, it pulled in $828 million. It could have probably cleared $1 billion if Nolan hadn't been such a Luddite. When Avatar exploded, everyone was rushing to convert their movies to 3D to grab that sweet, sweet ticket surcharge. The studio begged Nolan to do it, but he refused, claiming it would just be a distraction. Then came The Dark Knight Rises. This movie was supposed to look very different. Heath Ledger's Joker was originally intended to be in the third film. Because of his tragic death, everything had to be scrapped and rewritten. Even Anne Hathaway thought she was auditioning for Harley Quinn for a solid 2 years, before it turned out she was playing Catwoman. By the time it hit theaters in 2012, it had a massive $250 million production budget and pulled in $1.08 billion. After that, Nolan finally announced he was done with capes and cowls. He hasn't broken his word yet, though you can bet the studio is still running around him begging him to just do one more. Interstellar was originally a Steven Spielberg project, and it was going to star Will Smith. Jonathan Nolan was writing the script for Spielberg, but Spielberg, being the busiest man in Hollywood, had 33 other projects in the pipeline and kept pushing Interstellar back. Eventually, he dropped it. Usually Chris is the one bringing his brother Jonathan onto his projects, but this time it was the other way around. Since they had to involve Paramount, who held some of the rights, they ended up with a studio divorce arrangement. Warner Brothers covered most of the budget and got the international rights, while Paramount kept the domestic ones. In this film, Matt Damon finally agreed to a role. By then, he wasn't the box office gold he was in the mid-2000s, so there was no talk of a 20% cut, especially since Chris Nolan had already claimed that percentage for himself. Nolan cast Matthew McConaughey after seeing him in Mud, back when Matthew was desperately trying to shed his rom-com heartthrob image and take on literally anything serious. For the first time in ages, Nolan didn't work with his longtime cinematographer, Wally Pfister. Wally had decided to try his hand at directing with the film Transcendence, starring Johnny Depp. The movie flopped so hard that it effectively ended Pfister's directing career. He was so burned by the experience that he basically stuck to TV shows after that. Nolan, ever the pragmatist, had already moved on to Hoyt van Hoytema, who became his new guy for all subsequent films. Interstellar hit theaters in the fall of 2014. On a $160 million budget, it grossed $774 million. It's widely regarded as one of the most scientifically accurate sci-fi films ever made, or at least the one that makes people feel the smartest when they talk about it, which is why it's constantly showing up on every top 100 list in existence. Dunkirk is widely considered one of Nolan's most modest projects. There's an unwritten rule that if you're a big important director, you're legally obligated to make at least one gritty World War movie. Nolan claims he just wanted to make a war film that wasn't standard, but the budget tells a different story. During the marketing campaign, the producers swore up and down they kept it under $100 million. But once the studio reports leaked, a $150 million production budget surfaced. How did they spend it? Well, Nolan, being Nolan, hates CGI crowds. Instead of using digital copies of soldiers, he used actual extras. And when they ran out of those, he just used cardboard cutouts. You can find sources citing $100 million, and others saying $150 million, depending on whether you trust the studio's PR team or the actual math. Nolan also cast Harry Styles, a brilliant marketing move to drag teenage pop fans into a brutal war movie. He insisted on hiring young, inexperienced actors because he read in history books that the beaches of Dunkirk were filled with actual teenagers. There was no real script. It was less than 80 pages. Since one page usually equals 1 minute of screen time, this movie should have been an 80-minute short. But Nolan wanted to improvise on set, resulting in a 110-minute feature. For his trouble, Nolan took a standard 20% cut. The movie grossed $525 million, which sounds great, but with that budget and Nolan's cut, the studio probably didn't pop the champagne as hard as you'd think. Tenet was the first Nolan film to technically flop, but let's be fair, it was the first massive blockbuster thrown into theaters during the height of the pandemic. The script for Tenet is widely rumored to be the most locked down document in Hollywood history. To prevent leaks, the studio only gave the script to the lead actors, and they had to read it in a locked room at Warner Brothers headquarters within a 5-hour window with security guards hovering over their shoulders. Poor John David Washington and Robert Pattinson probably didn't even have time to go to the bathroom. Despite all the secrecy, most people didn't understand the movie anyway, which is peak Nolan. It grossed $365 million on a $205 million budget. That budget was massive because, per his usual no CGI policy, Nolan literally bought a real Boeing 747 and crashed it into a real building. He refuses to do things the easy way. Nolan demanded a theatrical release to save the cinema experience, while Warner Brothers wanted to push their streaming service. It led to a messy, high-profile divorce that ended a 20-year partnership. Nolan packed his bags and took Oppenheimer to Universal. The breakup was so loud that Warner's new leadership is now reportedly throwing seven-figure checks at Nolan just to get him back. They even sent him a goodwill check for his work on Tenet without him even asking. Oppenheimer was the moment Christopher Nolan officially proved to Hollywood that he is the only human being on the planet capable of turning a 3-hour drama about theoretical physics, where people spend half the time staring at chalkboards in dark rooms, into a box office monster. When Nolan walked into Universal with a pitch about the father of the atomic bomb, he laid out demands that would give any studio executive a heart attack. A $100 million budget, total creative control, no studio meddling, and 20% of the first dollar gross. That means he gets a cut of every single cent before the studio even makes their investment back. And they signed it without blinking. They knew they were dealing with the only brand in Hollywood that actually guarantees tickets. Nolan shot it in his signature style. If he can do it for real, he won't use CGI. For the Trinity test, the first nuclear detonation, he didn't just fire up a render farm. He used a mix of real explosives, gasoline, and magnesium to create a blast so visceral it made audiences forget to breathe. On paper, the budget was $100 million. But in Nolan's world, numbers are just suggestions, and we all know that production costs have a way of evolving. The film raked in nearly $975 million worldwide. And keep in mind, it was rated R. For a movie with that rating, making nearly $1 billion is like winning the lottery twice. Oppenheimer didn't just succeed, it made Warner Brothers realize they just committed the biggest blunder in studio history by letting their golden goose walk. And then there's the recent buzz about the Odyssey adaptation. The casting choices? Let's just say they weren't exactly aiming for historically accurate Greek portraits. The casting of black actors in roles historically perceived as ancient Greek sparked the usual culture war shouting match, but the cherry on top was Elliot Page. For a production that seemingly wanted to play fast and loose with history, the casting choices felt like they were pulled from a randomizer app rather than a casting director's office. But the real comedy gold was the costumes. It's like the wardrobe department just walked into a Spirit Halloween store 3 days after the holiday and grabbed whatever was left on the clearance rack. Historical accuracy apparently meant whatever looked cool on Instagram. If Homer saw what they did to his epic, he wouldn't just be rolling in his grave, he'd be haunting the studio lot. Nolan, for all his pretentious, pretend intellectual faults, at least respects the vibe of his settings. He wouldn't let his actors wear plastic armor just because it was cheaper. But for this project, it seems the only thing epic about it was the scale of the public roasting it received on Twitter. He's officially on top of the world. He does what he wants, how he wants, for whatever paycheck he demands. So give the man his carte blanche. Let him throw $250 million at a mythic epic like the Odyssey. Let him mess with the casting, the costumes, and the historical timeline until it's barely recognizable. And then let's see what happens. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.